I want to talk about this story. It didn't get much attention. There's a story of 44 states that are suing. There's just a lot of civil and criminal activity that's happening around, obviously, the drug makers. And, at this point, it seems like it would be a radical idea to not nationalize the production of a lot of drugs and to inhibit and to not intensely regulate this industry. The amount of criminality, the amount of market failure, the amount of collusion amongst drug makers would make it almost a radical idea to not dramatically increase regulation and to produce our own generics. We have a case where 44 state attorney generals are suing generic drug makers over price collusion. We have the ongoing stories about Purdue Pharmaceuticals and the Sacklers, who are looking at potential criminal liability for the way that they marketed and produced with the knowledge that they were basically selling a highly addictive substance to people under claims that it was otherwise. This story is just stunning. One of the other drugs that was out there that was also an opioid, or at least a synthetic opioid, that the CDC says was responsible for more than 28,000 deaths in 2017 alone. I mean, think about this. You have 28,000 deaths. What is the algorithm? How many of those deaths correlate to just incredible suffering and destruction of lives? How many people did not die and who are addicted to these substances? And it's destroyed their lives. It's destroyed their families. It's destroyed their future. And this is just, it's stunning. It is a case, it's a criminal case of essentially the top executives of a company called Insys that made Subsys, which is a spray version of fentanyl. And I have a good friend who got addicted to fentanyl, and fortunately survived, but was very lucky. And there were five executives who were found guilty on racketeering charges because they bribed doctors to prescribe the painkiller to people who didn't need it. These drugs were developed to deal with the most acute cases of pain, basically cancer victims. And what the companies that produced these things did was basically tell doctors, like, there's a guy down the street who started to prescribe these for, you're recovering from surgery, you've got back pain. And they're making a lot of money. And that's basically what happened. It was approved by the FDA in 2012 only for cancer patients who had recurring pain. And they started to do off-label marketing for this. So these guys were convicted. And one of the things that came out in the course of the case, I'll read some of this to you, was that they produced a rap video that involved a couple of the executives dressed as rappers. They were singing it. It is very professionally done. They also introduce a bottle of Subsys that is like the inhaler, essentially. The video is titled Great by Choice. It was meant to train sales representatives to push subsys, to not worry about this stuff, as it were, basically. In fact, one of the executives who was found guilty dressed as the spray bottle. And they pled guilty to participating in the scheme to bribe doctors. The bribes included stuff like getting lap dances for the doctors, taking them out to dinners.
Competition starts kicking in.
$2,000 per person dinners. Apparently, at one point, there was panic in one executive who shouted from his office about the company keeping track of how much money Insys was making off of doctors who were paid speakers. They would go to conferences and be paid by Insys without revealing that they were being paid by Insys. And Insys had a record of how much money they were making out of these doctors' offices. He was in his office screaming, "We're all going to jail." And it turned out he was correct. But this is just gives you the mentality of, and really, honestly, like, I don't know. These guys, the only difference between these guys and the pharmaceutical industry writ large is these guys are on the cutting edge of marketing and just a little bit more hip in their minds. We're going to really, we gotta project baller status to our sales reps. And here is some of that video. We have sped up just a little bit so that we don't get dinged on YouTube, but here it is.
Start discussing substance, yes, Lord. I don't know if it's an option, but before your first script, we need to print you out of opting out, please. I love titrations, yeah, that's not a problem. And I got new patients, and I got a lot of them.
Pause it. I love titration, and it's not a problem. That is how you get off of a substance that is physically addictive. So they're saying, like, yeah, don't worry. The titration's going to be easy. I got a lot of patients, and I've got even more of them. This is where the subsys bottle shows up.
Y'all think you bad? Well, I'm the baddest. I was created in the lab in the land of the cactus. Debated, I'm the man, understand you can't match this. Even if you ran and you planned and you practiced, I would still overlap you on this track too. As a matter of fact, while I shatter this rap, let's shatter and grasp my delivery. It's giving me 38% of this industry plus my bioavailability. I'm built to last, y'all can't get rid of me. How'd even be sick of me? But attacking me is actually practically just silly as comparing act tick of me. Y'all tickle me. This ain't no fight at all. If you're trying
Pause
to
it. 38% of the industry at this point. They had already, the subsys bottle had already cornered. Go ahead.
I'll substitute you like it was xylitol. High beast.
I love titrations, yeah, that's not a problem. And I got new patients, and I got a lot.
This is a good thing to remember when executives say that they work like 80 hours a week.
Right.
I love titrations, yeah, that's not a problem. And I got new patients, and I got a lot of them. If you want to be great, listen to my voice. You can be great, but it's your choice. I love titrations, yeah, that's not a problem. And I got new patients, and I got a lot of them. I love titrations, yeah, that's not a problem. And I got new patients, and I got a lot of them. I love titrations, yeah, that's not a problem. And I got new patients, and I got a lot of them. If you want to be great, listen to my voice. You can be great, but it's your choice.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah,
It was very motivational.
super
Competition
motivation.
would start kicking in.
Right. There you go. It's all happening,
Not
folks.
a straight player.
So those guys are going to go to jail, and hopefully more of them will. And then hopefully we're going to have just the profit motive is the same across the board with these people. And so, you know, the last concern that anyone should have is that we're going to become too socialized in the context of how we regulate and maybe produce drugs.
You don't think these guys and Martin Shkreli are just bad apples?
Right. Well, you know, The one of the greatest myths is that one bad apple doesn't spoil the whole bunch. In fact, it literally does. One bad apple, which is why you should not keep your apples in a plastic bag in your refrigerator. You should separate them and because they excrete as they go bad. They excrete a gas which causes other apples to go bad. So keep that in mind. One bad apple does, in fact,
This video was like that gas.
spoil the whole bunch. Indeed.